Alright, hey, welcome back to my channel here. I'll just be going over what's in Fblthp's vault and the cards that I feel like you should be targeting, which cards are worth checking out, and which ones you should avoid. Because mana crystals are fairly limited resource in this game, the way you spend them is really important as far as what you can do and how far you can go in the game in terms of collecting cards. And so there are some really useful cards in Fblthp's vault that I believe that you should target, especially toward beginning players, but this guide will do well for any player really. Sort of mid to high level players will also get some use out of this, I think. So let's start with the S plus tier, must-haves, chase these. And then just below that, these cards are great to have and you'll find them useful. A tier is useful and good in many events and scenarios. And I think below that, I would make it it's a tough case to make to decide to spend your crystals on these. And anything below B and C, I would say don't bother trying to collect. Don't spend your crystals on them, even though, I could go down in even smaller tiers. But yeah, let's first start with the cards that I think you should pick up and why. So, Fblthp, World Sculptor. One of the best creatures in Standard right now, and honestly one of the better creatures in the game. The fact that it's both red and green means that you can use it in a lot of other decks that you might not think to use them, like for example in a Koth deck. Just comes out really strong. The forest tokens, X is the number of green gems, so obviously you want to put it in a deck that has a lot of green conversion in it, but you don't necessarily have to. And the reason this is a really powerful card is that by stacking them up and cheating them into play, you can get a lot of forest tokens on the board. Helps with a lot of objectives, such as summoning creature objectives and all that. So, excellent card. Definitely pick it up. I did it myself for my main account, and I'm really glad I did. It took me a while to finally pick up, but when I did, I was so happy I did. Tiamat helps get all your other dragons out. It's a dragon leader, so it eats up dragon tokens. So that's also very useful, but just a monster of a card. Also, one of the better creature cards in the whole game, standard or not. One of the higher tier cards in the whole game. So, the fact that you can just go ahead and grab it out of the vault with enough crystals means it's amazing. And I think I got both the art and non-art version of this card, but yeah, especially if you're going for dragons, this is very worth having. The Prismatic Bridge. Prismatic Bridge, I think, might be the #1 card in the vault right now. It's such a useful card. Fetch the first support card with Herald, creature, or Vanguard from your library. So support cards with Herald, we'll get to a few of them as we go, but the reason that is awesome is you can get your equipment out on the battlefield, but I would say the most useful part is getting a creature out every turn. The only thing is sometimes it will fetch itself, which will get Essica, God of the Tree, but that's not a bad creature in and of itself either, so don't sleep on that. But also being able to fetch Vanguards, most of the best ones are pretty expensive, so being able to get them on the board for free, getting like a Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, getting 2 of them out means that you'll be able to get the heroism emblem on it really quickly. So Prismatic Bridge is a card that goes into so many of my decks that it's really worth having. I think I have both the art and non-art, non-full art version of this as well, so they're both mastered. Old Gnawbone, another really strong creature in Standard. Lets a lot of things happen because of all the gold tokens, and because Kamigawa Nia Dynasty is coming out soon, and it interacts with a lot of artifact supports, which are gold tokens. This is going to be a must-have in once the next set comes out. So it was already meta-defining when it came out, and it's about to do it right over again. So pick this one up. You'll be glad you did. Savior of Olenbach. Now, this doesn't at first seem like such a crazy, amazing card, but it does a lot of different things. When this creature trains, exile target opposing creature into your exile. So that's removal right there. If you can't, exile the first creature card without buried from your graveyard. So most creatures don't have buried. Buried isn't a mechanic I use a lot anyway. So for the most part, if you're milling your own graveyard, you're going to be able to exile those creatures from it, which can both be good or bad. But in our case, it's good because when this creature is exiled or dies, you can pick up to 4 of the first 4 non-spell cards from your exile, and you move those cards into play under their owner's control. So if you're able to just like toss them from your hand, creatures and stuff, in a way to force that exile or death to happen on this guy, you just bring all those cards right back into play. So my favorite way of abusing that is by using teleportation circle. So after every turn, if you have a bunch of stuff that you just chuck out of your hand into your exile, you'll bring them right back. So you're basically getting a lot of cards into play without paying for their mana cost. So that's huge. Even though it's not a strong creature, you can get all your strong creatures out for free with it. So really useful card. And our last one is Rem Carlos, Stalwart Slayer. Super useful card because it gives everything else prevent damage. That's the main use for it, but it's got other little cool things you can do with another source you control deals damage to your opponent's planeswalker, deal 2 damage to your opponent's planeswalker. There's some cheesy combos you can do with that. But really, the reason to have this card is just by giving your other creatures prevent damage by default. And you can make these massive walls that are impenetrable, especially if you give them hexproof via other means. So, yeah, I would say that these, these 6 cards are must-have cards that everybody should target. They will improve everybody's collections by owning them. So, S tier. These are all useful cards, and I would recommend everybody have them as well, but they're not quite on the level as the other one. Coma Cosmos Serpent is in Fblthp's vault at the time of this recording. If you've picked up all the other 6 cards above this tier, I would say Coma would be the next one to target because it does so well with tokens. It populates 2 times after every turn, and if you have tokens on the board, or you can disable your opponent's first creature without having to target it, which is huge. This is a card that I kind of go back and forth between using it a lot and not, but definitely a useful card that you'll find a lot of fun uses for. Next one, in very similar fashion, Tanazir Quandrix is a dragon you can cheat out or bring out with Tiamat. Not necessarily cheat out, but get it out and only pay half of its mana cost to get the rest of it on the board. And double all buff values of target creature you control when it enters the battlefield, which can sometimes be pretty good, although it's not usually the thing I use it for. But when this creature attacks, you may have the base power and toughness of other creatures you control become equal to this creature's power and toughness until end of turn. So that means once you start reinforcing this or buffing it, you're basically doing the same thing for all the rest of your creatures. So this card, especially in conjunction with Fblthp, will win you games so quickly. I would say Fblthp and Tanazir are an S plus tier combo of cards that will help you win a lot of games. Sword of the Realms is a card I really like. While on the board, your first creature gets +6/+2 and gains vigilance. So if you have this guy, Rem Carlos, giving your creatures vigilance, means that you get this wall that cannot be penetrated. So also, when your first creature die, you may return that creature to your hand and it gains half its mana. So even if somehow that creature dies, you might be able to get it back on the board again. So this is my favorite equipment, maybe of all time, but yeah, I think it's very much worth having. Valkyrie Protector's Shield. The reason I like this card is because it gives hexproof to your creatures as well as prevent damage when you prevent damage for the first time. Only problem with this card, using it with Rem Carolus, is that you lose Rem Carolus' prevent damage when that effect is triggered. So you gotta be careful with that. But giving everything hexproof just permanently, as long as the card is on the board, is very useful. You'll find yourself happy you had that. It's actually really annoying to face as well. Circle of Confinement. I threw this in here because I just think it's a good card especially for beginner players. When the support enters the board, exile target opposing creature. And I don't think I've ever noticed the second part of this card, so we don't have to worry about that. So when it comes to commons and uncommons in Fblthp's Vault, they're probably not worth picking up, especially if they're cards that you already have. It's more just almost like giving your account a little extra flavor to it. But if you are brand new to this game and are really desperate for creature removal, this isn't a bad one. A lot of times support cards that do removal have a little, I don't know, downside to them, but this one actually doesn't. So that's why I like it. So now we're in A tier, and these cards are, I would say, worth having, but I wouldn't pick them up until you've gotten the rest of the other cards. Inferno of the Star Mounts I actually picked up for my alt account because I needed a strong creature for red and for my Nicol Bolas the Ravager deck. So this card actually ended up helping me beat a lot of bosses. So I'm glad I picked it up, but it's by no means the best dragon you can pair with the other ones, but it is a really strong card. And once your collection grows, I think you'll find it more and more useful. I don't even know how you say his name, Drizzt Do'Urden. The token it creates, I believe, is a 9/6 creature with Trample and Berserker. So it just creates, just when it hits the board, it creates, let's see, when another creature dies, if it had power greater than this creature gets +X, +X. X is equal to the difference. So this is an elf, so you can use it in elf-based decks as well. But I think it's just a really solid card. Creates two powerful creatures when it enters the board. And yeah, it's one that I wish I had, but I just don't want to spend 400 crystals just for it on its own. So I'll just wait to pick it up in packs. But definitely worth picking up if you don't have strong creatures in white and green yet. Sorrow Realm Eater. When a creature or support is destroyed, this creature gets +1/+1. That already, in conjunction with a few other cards, is worth taking a look at. But really, what this card is best used for is kind of a pseudo board wipe. Because, so at the beginning of your turn, you may exile each other creature and each support with base mana cost lesser than this creature's power. If you do, this creature loses all of its buffs and reinforcements. So if you buff this creature a lot and you find that you need to get rid of a lot of pesky things on your opponent's side, you can choose to do that. And you'll be surprised at how useful that is a lot of times. Magda Brazen Outlaw. It's not a card I own, but I've seen people use it a lot. Or not a lot, but a decent amount. I don't really care about the first part, but at the end of your turn, if you control 5 or more treasure tokens, you may destroy 5 of those tokens. And if you do, pick one of the first 4 different artifact or dragon cards from your library, fetch that card, it gains full mana. So if you combine this with this dragon, you can keep pulling out Gnawbones by using this card. So there's a good combo there. Minsk Beloved Ranger. This was one that I did pick up for my main account. And when this creature enters the battlefield, create a Boo token, which is just a 1/1 little hamster guy with double strike, though. But the Boo token, whenever it does combat damage, you gain 6 mana. So every time this creature does double strike, you'll get 12 mana back. So that's really cool. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may drain all mana from your hand. And if you do, target creature you control gets +X/+X and gains a giant subtype until end of turn. And X is the amount of mana drained that way. So there's a lot of different functions for this card, and it's tricolor. So that's also awesome. And you can create huge swings in power. And if you put it on his little hamster Boo, that means you can double strike for that power. So pretty useful card. I think when I first picked it up, I was slightly underwhelmed, but then once I figured out how to use him, pretty big monster of a card and only 11 mana to get out. So yeah, especially when you start to get those decks that just create so much mana for you, you can really do a lot with this card. So don't sleep on Minsk. Brutal Cathar, or Cathar, how do you say that? Anyways, when this creature enters the battlefield or transforms, exile target opposing creature. So it's just a nice little removal in the form of a creature, and it's got a flip side as well that, gosh, I'm trying to remember what it does, but mainly what I like it for is being able to exile a target opposing creature upon casting. If you pair it with things like teleportation circle, it's actually a very useful way of wiping your opponent's side. So Edgar Charmgroom was not a card that I really thought was that great until I started using it and started seeing it. It's a really annoying card to face because once it dies, the Edgar Markov's coffin token creates little lifelink vampires, and within a couple turns, it's right back on the board. The Markov's coffin token, when it's destroyed, this card comes right back on the field, and it's got haste, which is kind of rare for white and black, so that's really cool too. Toski, Bearer of Secrets. This one, I got the regular art version not too long ago. Can't have its mana drained or raised. It can't block, but you can give it Berserker, and it's got prevent damage. And when a creature you control deals combat damage to your opponent's planeswalker, draw a card. It gains X mana. X is this creature's power. So if you buff this creature up, that's when you get some real strength out of it. And when you're attacking, you're drawing cards, giving them a lot of mana at the same time. So really useful little card. Not one I use enough, maybe, but I'll look into fitting it into other builds of mine. Tovalar, the Midnight Scourge. The reason I like this card, it's not a must-have by any means, but the reason I like it is because you can, similar to Minsk, target wolf or werewolf you control, such as Tovalar. If you drain the mana from your hand, you can give it a big buff and it gains trample. So that means that you can do a pretty decent amount of damage to your opponent that way. And when it attacks, you draw a card and it gains half its mana. So you're doing a lot with this card, and it's pretty strong, especially when you do that mana drain. Turgid, God of Fright. This card is great in decks that mill your opponent, because whenever opposing non-token creature support is destroyed, losing a enforcement, or when your opponent discards a non-copy, non-spell card, you may create a copy of that card into your hand. That card gains full mana, so you're basically stealing your opponent's cards and putting them into your hand, and you're able to play them for free on your next turn. So that can be really rad a lot of times. Dire Strain Demolisher. This is the flip side of Burly Breaker. I think it's just a pretty solid uncommon card. An 8/7 with Ward can be pretty useful, especially if you start reinforcing it a lot. So if you don't have a lot of strong wolves and you need them for objectives, you might consider picking this one up. But like I said, it's an uncommon, so it's likely that in the course of your play you'll get him, but you might not. Case in point, Herald King of Skemfar actually had to craft to get the non-full art version of the regular version of this card, but it's a pretty useful card because when it hits the board, you might either fetch a copy of itself so that you can reinforce for fairly cheap, 8 mana, or you can fetch a Vanguard from your library. I don't even know which ones have the Tyvar subtype, to be honest. Not one that I've ever really used, but just a pretty good card for fetching creatures, and it can get really annoying to fight against. So it's worth using in certain builds for different objectives. Alana and Alina Partners, I did a whole video describing why this card is useful. And, it's a common, so you probably won't need it, the full art version of it, to pick it up, but I just like it. I like this card enough that I just got this version of it for my main account. I know it's kind of a waste of crystals, but still, I just like this card a lot. Alright, now we're all the way down to B tier. And I'll just go through these really quickly. We don't need to spend a lot of time on them. But like I said, these cards, it's very much up to you if you want to spend the 400 crystals on these cards. Foreign Collects is one of the more useful of these, but you can definitely get by without it. It's definitely not one of the stronger creatures out there. I do like that it's a 9/9 with haste and trample, but it's pretty expensive. And I almost never really care that much about proliferate. It's rare that it actually does anything that useful. And another thing, when an opposing creature is buffed, that creature loses all of its reinforcements. Sometimes that's really cool, but a lot of times that doesn't do a lot for you. It's not usually a difference between winning and losing a lot of times. Charix, there are some combos you can do with this card, but probably not worth spending the crystals on. I don't own Icing Death Frost Tyrant, but this would be one of the dragons that I wouldn't spend a lot of time chasing. If you happen to have Tiamat already, which I hope you do, maybe you'll want to pair it with this dragon, and also with Imrit Desert Doom, which I think might be a little bit better of a dragon. When this creature deals combat damage to your opponent's planeswalker, draw a card. gains half its mana, and if you have less than 3 cards in your hand, draw cards equal to the difference. So yeah, that could be pretty useful. So I would probably pick up Imrith before Icing Death. Galazeth Prismari is not a card I own either, but I've heard it's not great. You can create so much more gold tokens with a card like Old Gnawbone. I know they're not in the same color pie, but still. When this creature attacks, the first spell card in your hand gains 2 mana for each artifact you control. So there is potential there. I wouldn't say this is a bad card by any means, but there are some more useful dragons. So Orvar, the All form, takes a lot of building around this card, even though it can be super powerful. When you cast a spell, if that spell targets a creature you control, reinforce the first other creature you control. So you can put that with a lot of different cards. One of the ones that come to mind are like Angel Fire Ignition, but I haven't really used Orvar since I got that card, so I might play around with this card and see what I can do with it. When a creature or support card is discarded or exiled from your hand during your opponent's turn, create a copy of that card in your hand and it gains full mana. Thing is, that's so unreliable. It's a really powerful effect, but it's very unreliable. There's not really a great way to get your opponent to make you discard your hand during their turn. And each of these effects can trigger up to twice per turn. So yeah, it's a little bit limited in that way. Potentially very powerful, but not that crazy game-breaking must-have sort of thing. Delina Wild Mage, pretty solid card, but maybe not worth the amount you have to spend on it. Same with Ebb and Death, another dragon. It's a zombie dragon, so if you have, like, for example, Necro Duality, that's a good card to use with it. But other than that, it's an okay card. I use it sometimes because it's a zombie dragon, but beyond that, it's not a card I use much. Seraph the Viper's Fang is a card I like to use in certain events because it's good for certain objectives where you have to deal combat damage to a planeswalker's creature or to your opponent's creatures. So it's good for that because it gives all your creatures Berserker and Death Touch. So it's an interesting way of destroying your opponent's creatures via green. And Kazandu Mammoth, it's a card I don't use a lot because it's a little bit boring, but the reason I like this card overall is for its land forming. A Kazandu Valley token converts 3 gems to green on your turn. And the landfall thing is nice too, but there are better creatures to put in most decks, but it's not bad. Essica's Chariot is a card that I pair with somebody like Tanazir, Quandrix, and if you have Garruk, is it Unleashed? Yeah, the second monocolored, mono green Garruk. It's great for populating giant beast creatures. So that's what I use it for. It's a pretty decent little card. Slogger, the Over Slime, is a fun card too. When I first got this, was one of the first cards I got from Midnight Hunt, and it surprised me how much I actually like this card. When a blue or green gem is destroyed for the first time during your turn, reinforce this creature. So you get to do that a lot. I would say that most turns you'll be able to reinforce this creature. And I almost never use its second ability. I don't really want to lose 3 reinforcements just to be able to convert 2 gems to blue and 2 gems to green. That's really not enough of a reason to lose 3 reinforcements. and I almost never really pay much attention to its third ability. Reckless Stormseeker, I like it because it can give haste to your other creatures. You get to pick which one. So once a creature without haste enters the battlefield, if this is already on the battlefield, you can give it haste. So that's pretty useful. It's a little weak. Even its flip side is still kind of weak too. I think it's like 4 or 5. And beyond that, let's see what else we got. There are uses for Omnath because it's got 4 different colors, so it's a good pairing with Mascot Exhibition. And I'll leave it at that. Gissa, Glorious Resurrector. There's never a card I really liked. I don't feel like it really does much, even when I face it, so I'm basing it on that. You can probably build stuff around it, but really not worth that much crystals for it. Same with Olivia. I've seen people build around it, and it takes a lot more setup than it's really worth. Sigarda was one that I thought I would use a lot more than I did, but it really hasn't panned out for me that much in terms of usefulness. Arlen Moon's Fury, I think you're better off chasing this one for crystal or for jewels instead of crystals. That's just my opinion on it. Oswald Fiddlebender can be powerful, but the way it buffs, the best way to buff it was with Old Gnawbone. It just takes forever. It really slows the game down, makes it unfun. But yeah, it's an okay card. Can potentially be very powerful, but just makes the game not that fun to play with. Hawkins Insight, I don't know. I actually jury's out on this one. I don't know anybody who owns this card or plays with it, so it remains to be seen if this card is worth grabbing from the vault or not. And with the amount of crystals it would take, I don't think it's worth the gamble. Grolnok the Omnivore is the only other uncommon that I would even consider picking up from the vault. It's a card that's actually useful in certain decks, especially ones that you're using your own graveyard milling for special reasons. So it's a combo card, but you'll likely just be able to pick it up during normal course of play. A lot of Vanguards are in this tier here. This is, I think, D tier. Lear, Disciple of the Drown. It's very much a combo card that takes a very specific deck build to make useful. It's fun-ish. Tried to really make this card work because I was excited to see and I thought it'd be really cool, but it's just way too cumbersome of deck build to be all that worth picking up for that much crystals. It's a very gimmicky card. A lot of these I don't own. Professor Onyx can maybe be okay. This is the best part of it, but yeah, it's just an okay. Mila Crafty Companion, I've used for certain things, but it's just a very average mythic. Kasmina Enigma Sage, I should probably use this card a little bit more, but I don't. I just feel like there's a lot better cards that I can be using other than it. So, just kind of falls by the wayside. Cemetery Gatekeeper, same thing. The cemetery cards, there's only one that I like, just Cemetery Protector. Um, the rest of them, I just don't find myself using very much at all. And then the rest of these are not worth picking up. Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter, not a good Vanguard. It hurts you until you get it onto your opponent's side. Henrika Dominathi is a very convoluted way of destroying your own creatures for very little payoff. I don't know why they made this a mythic at all. Luca Wayward Bonder, very limited in its usefulness. It just takes too long and just doesn't do enough. Jaren Corrupted Bishop is a terrible card just all around. I tried to make this card really work, but it just takes way too long to flip it, and the flip side was bugged, and I don't know if they've ever fixed that, so don't use this card. Just like avoid it, actually, like actively avoid this card. Torolf's Hammer, you would think that was a little bit better than it actually is. Your first legendary creature gets +7 and deal 3 damage to any opposing target. And I don't remember even what the Herald side does, but it's just an okay artifact equipment. I thought it'd be better. And All Run God of the Cosmos is one of the worst cards you can spend your crystals on. Maybe just a little bit better than Jaren Corrupted Bishop, but not by much. Which is very complicated to get anything really all that useful out of it. And it's a 1/1 god. Very weak. At the beginning of combat on your turn, this creature's base power and toughness becomes at XX. This X is the number of cards in your hand plus the number of 4 total tokens you control. So at most, you're getting a 6/6, and you might be able to get a half mana card. Yeah, not great. So, all right. I hope that gives you a good rundown as to what you should spend your crystals on when next time Fblthp comes out. And if it's not on here, then